Hello and welcome back to an Out of Spec Bits video. I just recently returned from China. Well, I guess China by way of Europe. It was a very confusing round the world trip. It wasn't entirely planned either. I actually found out I was going to China like 2 days before I went to China. So I thought it'd be really interesting to do an episode kind of discussing the impressions on China as a whole based on its car industry, the EV industry specifically, but also talking about Zeekr Group, who was actually the impetus for bringing us there, and the Shanghai Auto Show, just some more impressions of everything. But I'm not alone. I also have my friend Felix with me, Electric Felix, as you may know from X/Twitter. He is also an avid EV and car enthusiast, tuning in from Netherlands. So let's jump right in and talk China. Hey Felix, how are you doing today?
Good, thank you. Yeah, I landed a couple of days ago, so I feel back on my feet by now.
That's good. Yeah. I got back, I guess Friday. You got back Sunday, so you had a little bit of extra time, which is kind of fun. And I'm curious what you thought. Being in China that entire, what was it, almost a whole week you were there?
I was there for almost 2 weeks, actually.
Right. Okay. You went a bit earlier and kind of connected some things. So I was, on the ground for maybe 3 days. It was a very short trip for me, but it was still very fascinating, especially coming straight from, the likes of Italy, where things feel much older. Still EVs, of course. We're kind of seeing those sprouting up all over the world. But it was really interesting jumping from one European place to then the landscape of electrification and just cities in China. So I guess let's start with that. Just your overall brief impression of 2 weeks in China as far as the car, more specifically the EV industry.
Yeah, it was very wild because I also, everything was very last minute, the whole trip. And I got my ticket confirmed very late. And it was actually an invitation for Hong Kong that made me go to China. And over there, I ran into Kyle. Actually, was hilarious because I was just going for this hotel breakfast, and then suddenly Kyle is having breakfast there. Very funny. But so the first contrast was really spending a couple of days in Hong Kong with one brand, and then I was planning on heading by myself to Shanghai, but I actually got this invitation. So that's why in the end I ended up on the Zeekr event, but that was also not planned. But yeah, it was very crazy because in Hong Kong, when you walk the streets, just like Kyle has shown as well, you see this crazy contrast of some cabs are driving around in what feels like from the Toyotas from the 90s, but then as well there are other cabbies that drive these Zeekr 009s that I saw for the very first time in my life. And then I ended up seeing them every couple of minutes, even though that whole vehicle was introduced, maybe a year ago, but I think less. So I think even the speed of change in China is one of the wildest things, and the combination of the contrast as well. And the mega city coming from Europe. Yeah, sure, we have Paris, we have London. Rome isn't a small city, but seeing these places like Hong Kong and Shanghai, it is just on a whole different level.
Yeah, they're humongous. They are densely populated, which is why, electrification makes a huge difference. They were also somewhat famous for just being pollution centers. I mean, people did not like walking around the streets there. And so I think rightfully so, there's a lot of, this is not really our expertise, but there's a lot of commentary on, the whole political climate in China and just how there's so much restriction based around things. But there's also the other side of that, where the government themselves are really pushing electrification. That's been the impetus to create some of these companies. Like you said, things move very fast. Zeekr was not really more than a glimpse of a conversation like 3-4 years ago, and now they're a huge company with the likes of just the battery R&D team is like bigger than the entire company of Rivian. Like, it's just, that might not be true, but it's an example of how much funding which I know is partially government centered, but also just how successful and how much of a market there is over there. China, like you said, has had a reputation for a lot of cars just being on the road for a long time because just keep them running as long as possible because you don't want to upgrade if you don't have to. But now there's just so many offerings. I mean, I'm sure you're similar to me as a car enthusiast. You enjoy going to new cities and you're like, oh my gosh, what are the cars in the city? Like you love seeing what's in the realm of where you're going, and this was no exception. I was glued to the window of our Buick GL8 van that was taking us to the initial hotel, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many cars I've never seen, some cars I've never even heard of, and then jumping into the Shanghai Auto Show was completely overwhelming. So I want to pivot to that. This was the Shanghai Auto Show that was part of the event we were there for. Zeekr brought us there, like you said, to go to the Shanghai Auto Show, see their booth for the Zeekr group, which, by the way, the Zeekr group consists of Zeekr and Lynk & Co., which is good to have those, I guess, paired together because some people are confused by which one's from which company because some Zeekrs look like Lynk & Co.'s and actually were intended to be Lynk & Co.'s, especially the Zeekr 001. Like that was originally a Lynk & Co. concept. So it's been a bit confusing for some people, but either way, both are an impressive slew of companies under this Zeekr group. So jumping to the Shanghai Auto Show, that was also chaotic. Maybe less chaotic than the streets of China themselves because it was just people traffic with all these crazy booths with crazy cars. I had seen photos before of shows in the past. This show's been going on for 40 some, 50 some years. But it was truly a spectacle. First of all, how much of the show did you get to see? Because we only had a few hours.
Yeah, I just kept on running, and it was just, it was absolutely, I knew it would be overwhelming, but even with that expectation, it still was. And just, I also wanted to really find out what kind of hardware was out there. But it ended up being a lot of suppliers, actually. So I couldn't find as many chargers as I hoped for. But I guess that's just really, that's sort of out of scope. Like there were a lot of software companies, there were a lot of parts companies that sell all kinds of stuff to the big OEMs. But just you see whole booths of brands that don't exist outside of China, and then there are these auto groups that have brands under them, and I saw booths that were run by the group, but then on the opposite side you have another booth that is from the certain brand, but they show the same cars but just in even more colors and more options. It was completely wild. And also seeing the online ness of this event was also great from the European perspective. I've never seen anything like this, where you have all these people that are live on their whatever feed it is, probably a lot of Asian platforms, and they are actually sort of selling these cars, I think. And this is the amount of everything, just the amount of cars on display, the amount of people live streaming everything, completely overwhelming and very hard to see the whole event. And I remember just trying to drink more coffee and run more, but just not making it, and knowing that this deadline 4 p.m. we need to be at the Lotus booth, and they even changed it last minute. Well, it was just impressive.
Impressive and chaotic. I'm curious on what you thought of the contenders who were there. I mean, you mentioned there was obviously a bunch of software companies and tiered support companies behind these OEMs, but there's also just so many OEMs, like you said, even some duplication, and there's even some, I think, confusion from what I gleaned from people walking around. They saw, Audi, okay, European, German car company, kind of premium. Obviously, the Chinese love their premium vehicles, especially, premium second row options, which is kind of a weird concept in the US. Everyone just drives themselves over here. So they're like, why would I put any effort into the second row? In China, it was like sometimes the second row is better than the front row. But you see brands like Audi, the four rings, or was it five ring? I forget. But then you see Audi four letters. So they have Audi four rings and there's Audi four letters. I mean, you're a European. It's a European car brand. Did that make any sense to you?
As a European, and especially when you think about the amount of people that were buying these German cars because of their heritage, yeah, you really wonder if it can do any good to throw that out of the window and go with these letters instead of these rings. But I do think that it was somebody from Zeekr who said this, but that actually the heritage is sort of becoming a burden in China as well, where if in China there's a lot of 30-year-olds who are buying new cars. This is something my 30-year-old friends in Amsterdam, they might get a new lease vehicle through their work, but nobody with private money is buying new cars at that age. So that is something you see entirely different. And then, yeah, clearly, if their parents were well off, they were probably driving something German in the past. And apparently there's really this stream going on where people want to show off their new stuff, and then the modern features are simply found in the local market. The domestic market is completely headed for everything online, the biggest screens, the craziest seats, especially in the back. Indeed, very crazy to see as a European as well. Yeah, people investing in the back seat. I never heard of such a thing. This is all very confusing.
Yeah, it's a weird dichotomy with there's I saw many European brands and also many American brands who had a Chinese presence that felt almost completely unique from the rest of the global presence. And I think you're right. There's their heritage perhaps of the global expression, how he's had this global sentiment that so many countries have experienced for decades. China, that wasn't so much of a thing. There wasn't, Audi hasn't never been as big there as maybe some other more local things. And so it's like almost redefining themselves makes sense over there. And I wonder if we'll see some of that with maybe like Ford. Like the Ford badge, carries so much legacy, especially in America, but also, they've been in Europe for so long, and they have, big manufacturing areas in Germany and such, and so many models that are, like absolute stakes in the ground in Europe that we never even see in the US. Like Ford is very much a American European brand, but then seeing some stuff in China, especially under like Buick and like or Lincoln, sorry. It's like, oh, they have their own kind of presence over there, and it felt kind of unique and different. Same with GM, of course, Buick models that we had never even heard of. So I wonder if they'll do some sort of departure from their existing branding, just like an ultra modern Ford logo, completely unlike the old school, blue background with the white kind of cursive that we see in our countries. It's all fascinating. Everything was just like different, but not like too scary. I mean, what do you see as like the consistent threads of like what these Chinese cars are, including Zeekr, but even some of the other companies that you may have looked at cars on the show? Like what was a consistent trend that made you think, oh wow, this is a quintessential Chinese EV?
Yeah, I think that for me, what I see as these Chinese EVs is really that they're sort of they're more cheeky than we're used to over here, and they really run into this connectedness where I feel, but this is hard to know for sure. Like, of course, I don't know how these locals treat their cars, but it feels like everybody's trying to get AI in these cars immediately, have people talking with their cars, and of course, yeah, if you're more focused on things like these back seats, yeah, in a back seat, a voice assistant makes much more sense, because you're probably also lacking buttons. And so, yeah, there's all these things going on that are just so unknown to me as a European. And I feel that, yeah, this presence of screens is just so different, that when you get into some of these Chinese vehicles, you sit in one of these seats, and sort of the screen is bigger than the window. It is absolutely humongous, and nothing like that exists over here yet. But actually, brands like Lynk & Co and Zeekr, they're very active on the Dutch market, my home market. So I expect that several of the vehicles that I've seen there will make it over at some point. But then again, yeah, you also really notice that a lot of these Chinese EVs, they're really long. And yeah, to have a 5-meter vehicle long or longer, I don't know what it's in foot, but to have that in downtown Amsterdam, where I live, it is just it's really a burden. So yeah, not all of these things will translate well, but this focus on the screens, the autonomy, the not having any buttons, and I think like a lot of communication with your phone. I even saw this demo of this the Neo CEO, who was waving with his phone, and then this is the most luxurious model in his whole lineup is dancing like he is moving his phone around. Like, to think of the BMW CEO doing stuff like this, yeah, I cannot imagine anything like it.
I know it's a very interesting, excitable, display focused, and not just display from the screens, but like you said, that's a huge thing. But also the componentry was really impressive. I mean, interacting with all of these screens. First of all, this is a relatively globally accessible show. Anyone can come from all over the world, and they encourage that, sort of. But also, so many of these vehicles had they weren't really global cars. They were made for the Chinese market, and so we are sitting in them, as speaking English or Dutch, and there's no English or Dutch options. It's just in Chinese, and you're like, okay, well, I can see the software is really snappy, but I don't really know what these buttons do. Some are more friendly than others as far as like what they like telling what they can do without having to read it, like using like pictographs or like imagery to kind of display what the button does. But then, like you said, the AI assistance, huge. The AI is becoming increasingly a thing throughout the globe, especially. But in China, if you didn't speak the language, it was like, well, I don't really know how to interact with this assistant. But I did see some demos of it from people who were speaking it, and of course, Jess tried some, and it was like really impressive assistants. Like it seems like they have a lot of capability with software, and I like to see that. I mean, that's something that I think a lot of companies are struggling with in other markets. Here in the US, there's a lot of new cars that are like, okay, it's a fine car, but like when you think of the charging excellence from these Chinese cars, the software capability and excellence, just the hardware running everything, the feeling is that we are just really slumping behind the but it's not even some of the American car. Like Tesla seems to have pretty great software, but then like charging still not as good as China. Full self-driving is very impressive here in the US. I've heard less so in China, whereas China has their own systems that are increasingly good. So it's this really interesting global battlefield of who can throw what features in fastest. And I'm curious to see if anything will be, bad, like pushing too fast. And then what if something like really, really breaks catastrophically, and just causes safety risks? Like you sometimes there's a balancing act. Some car companies develop things way too slowly, and you're being a bit more too conservative on this. But then sometimes it feels like things are rushed out, like maybe the Cybertruck a bit, in which case a lot of things weren't fully baked. So it'll be interesting to see. It's interesting to see the Chinese landscape now versus a few years ago. But oh my gosh, like the Shanghai Auto Show 2030, what's going to be the landscape at that point? It'll be really fun to observe.
I think that freaks me out the most is really this tagline, China speed, that you heard everywhere, and that was very big on some booths even. It is just I was invited by a brand who just shows this vehicle that, yeah, I think they introduced it a year ago, but they're already doing this huge refresh that is both visual and the tech side of things, and the new battery in there that charges way faster. And the last model was already, sort of out competing any European party. So yeah, especially also on the charging side, that the one brand offers 10C charging peak now, and the other says we're doing 12, and in Europe you're very happy with 3C charging. So what is this? So yeah, it's really the speed of change, and to have more software in these vehicles, of course, creates this opportunity to upgrade things fast. But I also know that some brands have pushed out hardware updates so fast because they are really in this. It feels a bit like, and this is, I guess you can see it because I walked around China quite a bit on my trip. And then when you get into these phone stores, or that were used to be known as phone stores, nowadays half the store is selling cars, and people are actually massively there for the cars. Like I saw stores where more people were in and around the cars than still looking at the phone.
Right,
And
like Huawei.
yeah, and Xiaomi as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, to mention Xiaomi, just earlier this week, Volkswagen was very proud of their Zwickau factory, that celebrated the 1 millionth full electric vehicle that it produced, since it was opened, if I'm not mistaken, in 2019. But the thing is that if you look at a company like Xiaomi that only sells one model, then they are already outpacing a factory like that, which is actually making 6 models for 3 different brands. So yeah, the speed of these things, that newcomers come into the market like that, and it's already the biggest market in the world for cars. It's the biggest market in the world for electric. It's the biggest market in the world for plugins and e-revs. And yeah, it feels like they are also speeding up faster, which is just, yeah, what are we doing over here?
Right. We see American and European car companies with a lot of, maybe, I don't know, Taycan's a good example. It came out, and then after a few years, you have this refreshed Taycan. Most companies that do this, where they just have like maybe a full update or a mid-cycle refresh after a few years. So like, what's a cycle? I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years. If you're talking mid-cycle in 3 years. In China, it feels like you have to be doing it much faster. The cycle length is just shrunk tremendously. I mean, it almost feels like a cycle is a year, maybe 2. So it just feels like everything's like 3 times faster. And even bringing a car to market, I mean, now you see like Volkswagen and some other companies being like, oh my gosh, we have to basically have this 34-month timeline of coming up with a car and getting it made to market in like 34 months, which I think previously just maybe cars just taking their sweet time, that's how we've always done it, was very gradual approach. And, especially the German cars, they're like, everything must be perfect. We have 18 meetings for what the turn signal should look like. And then you have like the Chinese approach, which feels like just insane. And I don't know the whole depths of how they do that, whether it is just purely more personnel, more bandwidth of people who can get these vehicles on the road. But then, yeah, I still fear, and there is a general fear of a lot of people in the world of like, well, these cars all seem really good. If you do the exchange rate to USD or euros, it's like, wow, they're really affordable. What's the catch? What are they missing? Is it true that maybe they do have some major issues that would be considered, recalls? And instead of becoming huge news because such and such car had a critical motor issue or critical battery issue and caused a fire, that kind of news may not make it out of China as well. You may see some of the suppression by the government because they really are trying to control some of the narrative. I mean, it was wild being in China, connected to Wi-Fi and being like, wow, I can't access so many of these sites I usually use to research things. So it seems like the narrative may also be a bit suppressed or changed in ways. And so what we observe from the Shanghai Auto Show is one thing, but like what's actually going to be the long-term effects on some of this, we're still learning.
Absolutely. And this is also where I mentioned the fast charging earlier that was announced, but it is very important to also realize that most of these things are for now announcements, and we don't know about the skill. Most of the vehicles in China that charge crazy fast aren't that cheap, so it's not like everybody is buying those. Most of the chargers that I found just on walking around the city and whatever, and even on the highway, they weren't crazy fast. They could have just been a random fast charging site somewhere in Europe, would have looked a bit the same. Okay, the Chinese one was maybe a bit bigger, so the scale is always a thing. Like, I don't think that ever in China you will encounter like a single Alpitronic yet, like you can really encounter in Europe anywhere. Especially if you go to a place like Italy, you will totally find all these villages that have one Alpitronic suddenly on the village square, which is beautiful when you need it. But in China, it would be 10 plugs minimum. So that is they do things differently in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, overall, it's just really shocking and impressive and slightly confusing. And, I did kind of a full tour of the Shanghai Auto Show. I almost feel like I shouldn't have filmed that because I had no time to prepare or research anything. It was really just me gleaning everything as I went and trying to show everything I could. I couldn't even make it to all the halls because the event itself was a little chaotic. I'm curious what you thought of the Zeekr event. I mean, it was awesome that they brought us over there, but also I know they're still learning how to do events. And, we ended up having so much time spent on buses and being transported around that we didn't actually have much time to be on the ground. So being at the Shanghai Auto Show for 4 or 5 hours, it's not really enough time. In case you're wondering, and in case some of you in the audience want to go next year, that was just chaotic. And that was, we were there on the press day, the media day. And like you said, it was still so busy. I can't imagine being there on the public days and just seeing how many people are, like you said, live streaming, people walking around with their phones, reading a script about a car, but then also answering questions and comments. That was totally fascinating. In the future, I would love 2, maybe 3 days on the show floor to really grasp and get more of a full tour, an actual in-depth dive on what's going on at the Shanghai Auto Show, and even get maybe some people's impressions. But that was part of our trip. But we also were taken to Hangzhou by Zeekr. So that was also 5-6 hours in buses or transport of some kind to get there and back. But we were taken to Hangzhou to this Zeekr playground situation where they had a bunch of models, some on display. They had the electric pickup truck, the radar, which was powering an ice cream machine. And they had Zeekr 009 Grand, which is just a lovely place to be, but also 43-inch TV in the back seat. That's insane. What did you think of this whole Zeekr playground situation?
That playground was so wild. Especially, I was happily surprised that they brought such big part of their lineup, and that we could even I could try things like the radar, one of these vehicles that I've been looking at it online and being sort of jealous because there are places in Africa where you can actually buy that thing, as in yesterday, and clearly Amsterdam doesn't need them. But I have neighbors who drive a Ram, and I would be super happy if they could try a radar at least. Obviously, it will never arrive in Europe under that name, but even in Africa, they sell it as a Redara, which is already hilarious to me. But I was just super happy that the whole lineup was there, because even a vehicle like the Mix, that is just this. Yeah, you might know it from Waymo, because they are actually in the US. They have a couple of them driving around, but the public cannot be in them. So to have the opportunity, I didn't. Yeah, well, clearly I expected on the Shanghai Auto Show to see one, but that me myself could go behind the wheel and drive this thing, and it was happy and sad at the same time, because I do wonder if it will ever make it here. So that is the sad part. But now it was totally amazing to see it in the flesh and to drive it, and it was super luxurious that they had all these options for us, and these Lincoln Co's, for example, the newest model, that 900, has 2 6K screens, so one in the front and one in the back. and it totally looks like a Range Rover as well, so people can really go sort of Range Rover half price with double the screen inside if that's what you fancy. And yeah, this but anyway, yeah, the event, I would have loved to have more opportunity, because they managed to get us Chinese driver's licenses, which makes me want to go back to China, because it's still valid for 3 months, and I want to
Right.
go on the most crazy road trips of my whole life. So let's see what's possible. But anyway, I would have loved more opportunity to go into the wild, because for me, actually, the charging is the most important, and it's a bit painful to find out after I was there that Zeekr actually has some of these megawatt plus chargers active in a location where they didn't take us, for example, and that would have been my preferred location to be.
Right. Yeah. It was cool to see them, proud of their lineup, of course, but then also we again had little time, relatively speaking, to do much with these cars, and also little chance to really push them. I mean, they had a little cone autocross course, which was like very, very brief. Like you can try some acceleration really quick, some braking, a little tiny bit of handling, and then you're done. Like the course is like 20 seconds long. And then you're right, they got us the Chinese driving permit, which is really cool. But then they took us out on this very almost like private looking road where it was kind of around a park, and we were like doing 15, 20, 30 kph, very slow speeds, occasionally up to like 50, but like, I mean, this was not really the road test that I was expecting or hoping for. So I tried to do, like a full driving and walk around tour of the 007 GT, the new shooting brake that they have. And I feel like it was a partial video in a way, because it was just like, they don't have the capacity for me to try everything out. And like you said, they're super proud of their charging. And that was like almost not really a component. They did have some people go to a charger to like show plugging again and stuff, but like all these cars were also too high state of charge to like really showcase the impressive. They should have had a car sitting there with like 8% just to show like a 10 to 80 blast, and just didn't have that. So I wasn't too pressured to try to do that, because I know Kyle was just in China a few months ago doing a golden brick charging session on a Zeekr 7X. So we had seen it, and they kind of under promised, over delivered. I mean, it did 10 to 80% in 9 minutes and 45 seconds, which is bonkers. So yeah, it's fascinating to see what this brand is capable of, and it was a fun glimpse for sure, but definitely a chaotic event, a chaotic time in China in general, especially when I wasn't even planning on going there. I was on a vacation elsewhere in Italy, and then was kind of pulled over to do this last second. So sorry to all the audience who was like expecting me to have every single thing nailed down. I did not have time to prepare, but hey, now I feel like I'm humbled. I have so much to learn about the Chinese landscape. I'm sure you've enjoyed researching and learning, and of course being over there for 2 weeks with both Xpeng, but also Zeekr, seeing Hong Kong and Shanghai and Hangzhou, and everywhere else you went. I mean, it's interesting that we're both kind of approaching China from a slightly different perspective, because of course in Europe that is a Zeekr market, and so some of the cars you are seeing, Neo as well. I mean, you're seeing cars at the Shanghai Auto Show that are, yes, a Chinese auto show with Chinese cars, but also you're like, wow, that I could be seeing that in the streets of Amsterdam. Whereas I'm over there as an American being like, I am probably never going to see this, because the governments will just never come to an agreement to bring these cars over. So it's interesting for me to see it as forbidden fruit, and for you to see it as like intense competition that may be coming, that will hopefully wake up some of the other companies. Any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
Yeah, I think there's sort of one hopeful point, perhaps, for the Americans here, because I feel that the one thing that will just sort of definitely happen is that there will be way more production of Chinese vehicles outside of China, and it will be super interesting to see what that will then do with tariffs and so on. Because I think that might turn the whole thing up its head. But yeah, I really hope that will get to see more of these vehicles in more places. And I really wonder if the Chinese will ever bring their charging, for example, to Europe, because right now it would be amazing if a company like BYD that is now running real megawatt charging at Sinopec locations, so that's sort of the Shell or the BP of China. And imagine if BYD strikes, they have contracts with companies like Shell. So imagine if they roll out that kind of stuff in Europe, it would be so wild. I'm totally open to see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fun and fascinating to watch all this happen in real time. So, hopefully we can go back to China at some point and see the progress, see how the landscape shifts, if at all. I mean, even things as far as like, obviously we were looking at cars when we were there primarily, but walking around the streets of Shanghai and seeing like all the scooters. I mean, there was like this crosswalk where like 100 scooters went by, every single one electric. And I was at crosswalks in Rome where the same thing happened. 100 scooters went by, all of them two-stroke, puffing out smoke. It was like, that was even funny to see like the dichotomy of those down to like the scooter transport. E-bikes are huge over there, of course, and we see a lot of Chinese e-bikes entering the US, but it's just a much smaller, cheaper product, so it makes a bit more sense because we have Chinese products here. It's just that the cars are like a whole nother scale. But yeah, it'll be fun to watch this happen, and hopefully we can maybe do future episodes as our minds continually wrap around it. We can even call the series like, I don't know, the European and American mind can never comprehend type of thing. So appreciate you coming on, Felix. Of course, you can check out Felix on X/Twitter, Electric Felix. He's very active over there, always showcasing new bits of news and stuff. And having a good voice in the industry. And it's fun to nerd out about this stuff, whether on Twitter or on air. So thanks for joining, Felix, and thanks everyone else for watching.
Pleasure to be here.